I spoke earlier to Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas. We spoke about the war in Ukraine and Iran, and I asked him if this war with Iran is now escalating beyond the U.S.'s control.
Well, this has turned into a battle for the Straits of Hormuz. The president gave negotiations a chance. I was not very optimistic given the fact that the regime is still, the Ayatollah and the IRGC. And the fact is, I wasn't saying when it didn't work, but now we're back to the military option to make sure the straits are opened up again. My question would be, just like when I was in Ukraine, taking out the launch pads for the Shahed drones. That's really what needs to be achieved to stop the mischief from Iran taking out these oil tankers. And so that's sort of how I see it.
That's not what President Trump has been talking about. He has said that he would strike power plants and bridges next week if Iran doesn't return to talks. That is considered civilian infrastructure, which under international law cannot be struck. That would be considered a war crime under international law. So do you agree with the president's approach here?
Yeah, I would not recommend the president violate international law. I think energy targets and military targets, as I saw Ukraine hitting in Russia, would be the appropriate route to go. I don't think hitting civilian, that just puts us on the same level as Iran and Putin, quite frankly. When I was in Kyiv, we had ballistic missiles coming in and civilian targets in Kyiv. That's not, we're better than that. And I think we should be held to a higher standard.
Let's talk about your trip to Ukraine. You returned recently. I understand that, of course, you met not only with President Zelensky, but also got a picture of what the front lines look like right now. Where does the war stand from your perspective, having visited?
Ukraine's winning. We were told 4 years ago it'd be over in 4 days. I was on the front lines in the probably most fiercest, where the fiercest fighting is taking place, watching their drone operations, watching them actually taking back Russian-occupied territories. The cost-benefit analysis is unsustainable on the Russian side. When you look at like Operation Spiderweb, $14 billion in damage to military and energy infrastructure at a cost of $14 million in drone technologies is absolutely incredible. The average lifespan of a Russian soldier, when I asked that question, they would say a matter of days, if not hours. So the attrition level is high. The war is becoming more unpopular in Russia. That's why Lindsey Graham and I worked so hard on the Russian sanctions bill to sanction Putin and hit him hard. Why? Not for war, but for peace, to get him to the negotiating table. President Zelensky made it very clear to me he's willing to call for a ceasefire. He's willing to negotiate. It's President Putin that is the problem right now. And I think President Trump finally understands that, and that's why he supported the idea of Patriot interceptor plans going into Ukraine so they can build their own Patriot interceptors that they need desperately as these ballistic missiles are coming from Russia into Kyiv.
Yeah, that was a key development of that NATO summit. But I want to come back to that point you made about sanctions legislation. The White House has stalled that legislation in the past, saying it ties the president's hands in his ability to negotiate. What has changed now, do you think, that would make it possible for a sanctions bill on Russia to pass and for the president to sign it?
Well, President Trump likes winners. I think, he does that when he endorses in primaries. I think he has looked at Russia and Ukraine, and he's, like a lot of us, come to the conclusion that Ukraine is winning this fight, and that Zelensky is not the problem here, that Putin is the problem. That's why Lindsey Graham, I think, was able to successfully get approval from the White House for our Russian sanctions bill to move forward. And I think there's no better way for Congress to honor Lindsey's legacy than passing that Russian sanctions bill. I hope we can move it as early as next week. I've been in conversations now with both the Speaker's office, the Senate, and the White House to move this forward.